Today I want to talk about one of my new favorite authors of all time, and now that I crushed the first half of his fantasy book series, we can get right into it. This is going to be a guide for Roger Zelazny and his wonderful works. This man won 3 Nebula Awards and was nominated 14 times. He won 6 Hugo Awards and was nominated 14 times. He is one of the best science fiction and fantasy authors of all time, and more people need to be reading him. And that's what this is going to be about. I'm going to go over everything I've read from him and why it should be read. I want to talk about the themes, his style, his influences, everything. Roger Zelazny, who was born in 1937 in Ohio, ended up getting a bachelor's in English and then a master's degree from Columbia University, specializing in Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, which will matter when we get into talking about his writing style and where he got his ideas. He started getting works published in the early 60s, and by the end of the 60s, he was a full-time writer. He spent the last 20 years of his life in Santa Fe and passed away in 1995 from complications with cancer. I want to get into what makes him such a special writer, and then I will try and expand on that as I go through his works. The thing about Zelazny that makes him so special is his blending of genres, his literary and poetic prose, his mythological depth, and just how he wore his influences on his sleeve in ways that take these common tropes or just accepted stylistic choices in the genres and he puts a little twist to them. Or sometimes he just straight puts something into his writing that is like ripped right out of a Jacobean play, and unless you know, you're just like, oh wow, that was a little weird or a little interesting that it's there. He's one of those writers that the more you know about his influences, the better his works get. It's like Terry Pratchett. The more you read older fantasy, the better you understand his writing. So not only is Zelazny an entertaining author, you get to go back and read his stuff, and it's just better every time. You find something you missed the first time, and the best part is his books are all very short, which means they're real easy to read again. One of the coolest parts of his writing are his mythological themes. In Creatures of Light and Darkness, you have Egyptian mythology. In And Call Me Conrad, or This Immortal, as it was published in novel form, you have Greek mythology. There's Hindu mythology in Lord of Light, Navajo mythology in Eye of Cat, and it just goes on and on. He does what most writers do, which is taking the mythos that defines a culture or a group of people, the type of thing that resonates with everyone, and he puts it into his works in very interesting ways. He does this with other things as well. He has like the Cthulhu mythos, which is a fictional mythos developed, in the last 100 years, and he puts that into A Night in the Lonesome October. And when it comes to his Jacobean influence, which is from writers such as Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, you see that his characters are complex. He has dark themes, there's intricate plotting. It's just like those works. His protagonists are often morally ambiguous, ambitious, and deeply introspective characters, just like you would find in the Jacobean tragedies. And then in like the Chronicles of Amber, Corwin, the main character, he is very flawed, but he has a sharp wit and he has a complex relationship with power and family, which sounds nothing like a Shakespeare play. The major themes of a lot of his stories are betrayal and revenge and the cyclical nature of conflict common in Jacobean dramas. Yet again, doesn't sound like Shakespeare at all. I said it before, but I'll say it again. What makes him special is his ability to take these things from other sources and blend them and make them his own. Speaking of blending them and making them his own, Roger Zelazny stands out not only because he was a fantastic science fiction writer and a fantastic fantasy writer, he fused them together. You see this especially in Lord of Light. He wrote that book in a way that it could be read as science fiction or fantasy, or both. It's just magnificent. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to his overall writing style are his literary and poetic prose. He's heavily influenced by Jacobean dramas. And I mean, we're talking about Shakespeare. When you're wanting to become a master of the English language, pretty good place to start. His writing feels lyrical and theatrical. His style is epic because of his obsession with mythology and the dramas. You can tell from every page of his writing that the man really knew what he was talking about when it came to classical literature and just putting words on the page that just flow through your mind, and they're brilliant. The last thing I will say about his writing is his books are short and it's wonderful. You don't miss out on anything in his shorter books because he's such a master of layering these narratives upon one another and these themes, and it's just magnificent to see someone so good at their craft be so efficient with their writing. From here on out, I'm just going to go through everything I've read from him in chronological order of how I experience the books. I think that will make it a little easier for me to kind of express like what I like about his writing and kind of how it has changed how I look at reading in general. The first book I'm going to talk about is Lord of Light, published in 1967. It won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 1968, and it was nominated for the Nebula Award in the same category. This book is magnificent. He takes Hindu mythology and combines fantasy and science fiction and creates such a magnificent story. The premise is basically you follow Sam, and Sam is going around saying he is the reincarnation of the Buddha. And the reason he is going around doing that is because he's trying to undermine the Hindu caste system that has been set up by the other people in power on this planet. And the way it all started was a colony ship landed and the crew used chemical treatments, biofeedback, and electronics to mutate their minds and create these aspects that they can transfer to new bodies. And over time, they developed the technology, and now anyone can get that, and they turn themselves into the Hindu gods. And the only way you can be reborn is by following the Hindu caste system and moving up and down based on how well you've done according to them. And this whole time they have taken technology away from the other humans on the planet. I won't go any further into it other than to say there's a scene in here that is the most tragic and beautiful thing I have ever read. I went back and read it for like the second and third time, just that section, and it was very hard to read through tears. It is magnificent. I do have a warning about this book. The first chapter takes place like 70% of the way through the book. It is like a kind of throws you in and you're like, wait, what's going on? What's happening? And then the very next chapter is a jump backwards to the beginning of the events. So just keep that in mind. Don't get too confused. Just push on through and everything will start to make sense. The book is short, like every other Zelazny book, and is probably his best work. It's so incredible. I'm going to read it again soon. It might be one of those books I try to read almost every year. I love it so much. After that, I read A Rose for Ecclesiastes from 1963. It is a short story that was nominated for the Hugo Award for short fiction in 1964. It should have won. I've read every short story that was nominated that year. This is the best one. The others are not good. I made a video about it. You could check it out. This story, you follow a poet named Gallinger. He is part of a mission studying Mars. He becomes the first human to learn the high language of the intelligent Martians and is allowed to read their sacred texts. And this character is a lot like all of other Zelazny's main characters. It's a very competent dude who generally has skills in the language arts and martial arts. A fun thing about Zelazny, he was a fencer in college, and after that studied a bunch of different martial arts. He was really good in like judo and stuff. The man was amazing. This story blends Zelazny's poetic prose with rich themes that explore the intersection of science, religion, love, and human exceptionalism. It is just so good. I mean, I read Lord of Light and I was like, wow, Zelazny can really write. Then I read A Rose for Ecclesiastes and I immediately was like, I think this guy might be my new favorite writer. It didn't take long. And so the next thing I read, because it was short, just like all of his books, was This Immortal. It was originally serialized as And Call Me Conrad, and it tied with Dune for the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 1966. Now, a quick aside, I complained about this in my video about the 1964 Hugo Awards. Why did Dune get nominated twice? It got nominated in 1964 as Dune World, which was like all the stories from Analog, but it counts as a novel, and then it didn't win, but then when it got published as an actual book, it got to run again in 1966. I've looked through the awards. I don't think any other book got to do that. It's a little sus. But anyways, this tied with Dune, and there's a reason it tied with Dune. Dune is magnificent. Well, This Immortal is magnificent in a totally different way. The book is a lot shorter. The scope is a lot smaller, and it is just beautiful. You follow Conrad, who is a scientist. He's basically a curator of Earth because in like a 72-hour war, Earth almost wiped itself out. By the way, real quick, I have a video about this. It's one of my early reviews, and it was one of my most popular videos from like the first 6 months I had a channel, and that made making my channel worth it, knowing that a good amount of people watched that video, because this book needs to be read by just about everyone. Anyways, you follow Conrad, who is a curator of the artifacts on Earth because humanity almost wiped itself out during a 72-hour war with nuclear weapons and biological weapons, and aliens showed up and were like, what are you doing? And basically stopped the war and kind of contained Earth, and most humans left and they live other places. Well, thanks to the radiation and the biological weapons and stuff, we have these weird mutated creatures and these dangerous life forms in these hot spots on Earth. If this wasn't an influence for the Fallout franchise, I don't know what is. And this book is just absolutely amazing. Just like a lot of other Zelazny stories like Lord of Light or Creatures of Light and Darkness or even Eye of Cat, you follow an overman, like someone who is a hero above what a normal man is capable of, basically like a god or a demigod. This book has a lot of philosophical depth that you won't see unless you're looking for it. It's not that Zelazny poorly expressed it. It's just one of those books that has several different interpretations based on the text as he wrote it, and it's just really, really interesting, and probably one of the more important books that he wrote, just because it has all the tones that you would expect from like the new wave of science fiction. Even though Zelazny said he wasn't a part of that, he was definitely an influence on the other writers that were part of that wave. The main character in this, Conrad, is a prototype for the characters in later Zelazny stories. You'll see as you read more Zelazny that he borrows from himself as much as he borrows from other writers. Fortunately, his stories are still so good that you don't mind that he's kind of repeating himself in some ways. But yeah, as I said, Conrad is the prototype for Sam from Lord of Light and Corwin from the Chronicles of Amber. Both are flawed humans who also happen to be flawed superhumans. When you're reading this, if you've read anything from Aldous Huxley, kind of keep that in mind. There's a kind of monomaniac scientist in this story that if you've read Brave New World, then you'll be like, oh, hey, yeah, look at that guy. I recognize you. After that, I decided to go to Creatures of Light and Darkness, which I thought was like a kind of pseudo sequel to Lord of Light. It's not. It has a heavy emphasis on Egyptian mythology, and it is one of the most bizarre books I have ever read in my life. It wasn't even supposed to be published. Zelazny wrote it as a writing exercise. He wrote in the present tense and then constructed an entire chapter in poetry. And then the final chapter is written as a script to a play. So when you're looking at this, you're like, what? I guess one of the best things Samuel Delany did, since I'm not a fan of him, was he convinced Doubleday to publish Creatures of Light and Darkness, which is just wonderful. This novel is different than a lot of his other works. It is very poetic in style. It is beautifully written like everything else he has written, but in just a different way. And the way he incorporates Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology into this like ultra futuristic setting is just fantastic. And he does a really good job of doing the whole, if technology is advanced enough, you can't tell the difference between it and magic. It's just so good. I don't want to talk about this story too much because the book is so short, and also like anything I say is probably going to spoil some interesting moments. So let's just leave it at this book is very good. It's magnificent on audio. Your eyes might dribble out of your head reading it in paper. So do with that as you will. The next Zelazny book I read was what Zelazny says is his worst book ever, and that was To Die in Italbar. He only published it because he needed money. He referred to it as his worst novel and said, if I could kill off one book, it would be To Die in Italbar. I wrote that in a hurry to make some money after I quit my job, which who hasn't desperately sold something after quitting their job? In spite of Zelazny hating it, the book is not bad. I like it. I don't like it as much as his other work. Like when I reviewed it, I said it was like a 2.5 or 3-star book because Zelazny wrote it, but if anyone else would have written it, it'd be like a 4-star book. It's just I have higher expectations for Zelazny, and I guess he did for himself. And this one is about a guy named Heidel von Heimack, known to pretty much everyone as H, and he has the power to cure people of incurable diseases. And the way it works is his healing powers have like a dark side, and he is basically Typhoid Mary. He can infect everyone with everything. Anywhere he goes can cause a plague if it's timed right. And so he avoids contact with humanity as much as possible. But when his diseases in his body go dormant, that allows him to kind of meet up, give basically his white blood cells, and they can be used to cure people. The story is about him doing that. I think one of the reasons Zelazny doesn't like this book is there's not a lot to it. You just look at it at face value, and that's about it. there's no underlying themes to this. There's not a richness to the story that you see in everything else he's written. So I can understand him not liking it. After that, I read Jack of Shadows, which is a very short book, a very strange book. It's another one of those Zelazny novels where he blends science fiction and fantasy, but this time he has separated them almost in opposition to one another. It takes place on a planet that is tidally locked. One side is always frozen, the other side is always too hot. So one side of the planet is in light and the other side is in darkness. On the darkness side, we have magic, like Fae style magic. And then on the light side, we have technology. On the dark side, there are powerful entities, and one of them is Jack of Shadows. And Jack of Shadows, also known as Shadow Jack. By the way, I have a review of this on my channel, so you can also check that out. So I'll be brief with the rest of this. He is out for revenge, and the story is basically a revenge story about what he is willing to do to get back at the people that screwed him over. And it's really good. This book is like his homage to Jack Vance. Yet again, we see Zelazny taking his influences from other writers and making it his own. Another fun fact about this book is he just wrote it in a first draft with no rewrites and sent it out, and it got published, which is just incredible. The next story is Eye of Cat, and I don't think I made a full review of this. This book is insane. It starts off as like one of the best like techno thrillers I've ever read, and then slowly becomes this psychedelic Philip K. Dick style trip through, I don't know. The main character is Billy Singer, who is like one of the last Navajo spirit hunters or something. He's gone to different planets because it's science fiction, and he has hunted these creatures. And one of them that he hunted was Cat, who is a shape-shifting telepathic creature, and it is insane. Zelazny does such a good job of blending like Navajo mythology into this, and the whole story kind of revolves around Billy Singer being like the last of his kind and Cat being the last of its kind, and their stories are like mirrors of one another, and it's very, very strange, but not bad. I think that of everything I've read from him, this is the one that is like the hardest to understand. As I was reading it, I'm like, what is happening? But I will tell you, in the beginning, when it's like a techno thriller, like there's this chase scene, my heart was like racing. It was so intense and it was so good. The nice thing about Zelazny is like, even when his stuff isn't at its best, it's still very entertaining to read. As I keep saying, his books are short. Like I think his average book length is like 205 pages, and the word count's not crazy. It's not like we've got like size 8 font or something in a hardcover. This past October, I read A Night in the Lonesome October by Roger Zelazny, and it was one of his last books. And the cool thing about it is each chapter is like a day in October, and that's kind of the way it's meant to be read, is one chapter a day. I don't recommend reading it that way. I had a lot better time just going through it in a day. The story is narrated from the point of view of Snuff, a dog who is the companion of a famous Victorian murderer. We'll just put it that way. I don't want to spoil a lot about this story because it has like this blending of all these cool characters from like gothic horror and stuff mixed with a Cthulhu mythos. The story revolves around the game that they play every October. All these characters come together and there is this magical event on Halloween. And the way it works is the clues have to be found and everyone's trying to guess who's on one side or who's on the other. There's the team that is giving and the team that is taking. And the goal is to basically make sure no one wins, because if someone wins, then very bad things are going to happen. And each character in the book has a familiar. And so while Snuff is wandering around, he's talking to like a squirrel that can talk, a bird that is his friend, and it's just very well written. I think that this alone just proves that Zelazny was a genius. He takes all of these different characters that we know from like Victorian era Gothic fiction and kind of makes them his own in a way that just freshens them up for the modern reader. And it's just so cool when you figure out who's who. You're like, hey, wait, I know that guy, or hey, I know who that is. It's just really fun. One of the best things about Zelazny's writing is he has this humor to him in a way you would see in a play from Shakespeare. This underlying like sharp wit among his characters just brings me so much joy. The last thing I read was Roger Zelazny's Chronicles of Amber, the first 5 books, basically the Corwin saga. The first one, Nine Princes of Amber, follows Corwin as he wakes up in a hospital in New York with amnesia, and they're keeping him drugged, and he doesn't know why. And so the first part of the book is him trying to escape. And after he escapes, he starts putting clues together, trying to figure out who he was. And as he does that, he learns that he is not of Earth, he is of Amber, and Amber is the center of reality. Everywhere else is a reflection of that place. There are infinite universes, infinite possibilities, and Corwin is one of the people that is able to go to those places. And this series takes everything Zelazny has done up to this point, and he melds it together with these infinite possibilities. And the first 5 books, each one shows off a different one of his strengths. In Nine Princes of Amber, Zelazny takes the classic portal fantasy idea and kind of twists it and makes it his own, and he takes just the generic trope of I have amnesia, I can't remember anything, time to learn stuff, dear reader, and makes it good, makes it fun and fresh. As I said in my wrap up recently, the second book, The Guns of Avalon, is his sword and sorcery. This man is so good at writing violent, fierce action in a way that a lot of writers can't. Then we have Sign of the Unicorn, which is Zelazny's kind of family politics and a almost murder happening and it needing to get solved and just all these layers upon layers, and it's just so good. And then book 4, The Hand of Oberon, it just blew my mind. Like there's all these twists and all these different things going on and layer upon layer upon layer. You almost need like a flow chart to kind of understand what's going on in some places. It has a twist at the end that just blew me away. I had to just sit and think about it, and I'm like, wait, really? Like I had suspicions early on in the book, and I kept thinking, is this not what I think it is? And it most certainly was not. And even kind of guessing toward it, the revelation just blew my mind. The last one in that series is The Courts of Chaos, which kind of ties everything together and resets the world of Amber in a very interesting way. It's action-packed. There's a lot going on, and I just had so much fun with these first 5 books. I've heard the next 5 aren't as good, but what do I care? Even if they're half as good, they're still going to be better than a lot of other stuff I read. And yet again, super short books. They're always about 200-ish pages. I love the Amber series. Like I said earlier, the Amber series takes kind of everything he's been doing and blends it all together. You see a lot of his influences in here throughout the stories. He will have quotes in here directly from Jacobean plays or other works, and unless you've read them, you're not going to notice them. I'm too dumb to notice them. I had to be told this by someone else who's a better reader than me. And the cool thing about the Amber series is it's Zelazny's playground. He can make anything happen because anything and everything is possible when you have infinite possibilities. Duh. So you get his amazing prose, his amazing pacing, his amazing characters, and then him getting to do whatever he wants. I mean, there's a reason it's called The Guns of Avalon, even though this is fantasy. I mean, the book starts in New York and they're like smoking cigarettes at like a diner or something. It is all over the place, and I absolutely love it. That is one of the things that makes Zelazny so special, is he did not care about genres, and so he'll blend whatever he wanted to blend into his stories in such a refreshing way that I feel like a lot of modern writers just can't or won't do because they don't feel comfortable doing it, or they don't have the skill to do it, or their publisher told them no. And it is just so refreshing to read a writer from 60 years ago that blended all of this together in such a magnificent way. And it kind of sucks because like he paved the road for these future writers to do this kind of thing, and then they just don't. And that kind of grinds my gears. I really love the blending of genres. Like, who needs labels? When it comes to like what you should read, you almost can't go wrong. Like maybe the first 5 Amber books, if you're in a mood for genre bending fantasy. I think that if I had to recommend a single book of his, it'd probably be this Immortal, because it's short, it's primarily for science fiction enjoyers, but it has some really interesting fantastical elements. And if you're brave and you want to do what I did, just read Lord of Light, which is probably his best book, and let it blow your mind and just change the way you look at fiction. Like, I read it in the middle of me being burnt out with a lot of newer fantasy and science fiction, and I was like, holy crap, this is such a refreshing read. Wait, this is from 1967? It just feels timeless. Even looking back at other science fiction published around that time, you're like, yep, this is definitely a product of the 60s, which it has some elements of that because at one point, literally everyone's smoking, but Zelazny was a lifelong smoker, and so there's a lot of smoking in his books. And if you want just a teensy taste of Zelazny, you can read A Rose for Ecclesiastes. It is free on Escape Pod's website. They have the entire text on their website, so just Google A Rose for Ecclesiastes. It's the first thing that shows up. My journey so far with Roger Zelazny has been so fun, and I plan on taking it further. I've talked about him before, but there's a collection of 6 hardcovers and trade paperbacks of all of Zelazny's short fiction, and that includes his poetry. He really loved writing poetry, but it was just hard for him to get it published, so I really want to start reading that. He has, I think, somewhere between 40 and 50 books published. They're kind of hard to track down in some cases, and in others they were co-written. He has Deus Irae, which is his book he co-wrote with Philip K. Dick, so I really want to get to that. He has some others he wrote with Fred Saberhagen. Those should be interesting. I can't wait to see the kind of ideas that Fred Saberhagen comes up with, but replacing his writing that's just like generally okay with Zelazny's writing, which is always magnificent. And beyond that, I'm not really sure what I'm going to read next. I have quite a few of his books just sitting on my shelf ready to go, and I think I'm just going to start chipping away. Kind of whatever looks interesting at the time, I'm just going to dive into. It's seriously going to be like a day of reading, if that. And if you're doing audio, his books average like 5 hours or something. It's just super convenient. Zelazny would be the GOAT just for writing short books that have a lot of depth to them. Like, please, man, I don't need another 1,200 page book, especially if you can get the same kind of story across in a lot less time. The entire Amber series, all 10 books, is like 1,000 pages. He really had a lot of respect for his readers' time. I'll just end it with saying, like, Zelazny is such a good writer. More people need to read him. Let me know in the comments if you have read Zelazny or plan to read Zelazny. And if you are a Zelazny enjoyer, let me know what I should read next. This is everything I've read from him. This video has been so fun to make. I really hope that everyone out there will give his writing a chance. And thanks for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.